Welcome to Charts Today. My name's David Linton, and today's edition for Monday, the 19th of January, comes to you from Sydney in Australia. Yes, I'm still here, but I'm heading to Singapore next week and then back to the UK the following week. So I was out with a client last night for dinner, a really enjoyable time, and he'd printed out some charts with the targets on. It was great to see how people are using the targets to make decisions, and we had a really good conversation over dinner. And one of the things we were talking about was the Japanese market and just the Japanese bond market. Many of you know I've been looking at bond markets, and we're just saying how the Japanese bond market, this is the 30-year Japanese yield, and how that is just pushing higher and higher all the time. And Japan is the most indebted country in the world. The debt to GDP ratio is something like 250%. And of course, Japan has lived with very, very low interest rates over a period of years. And now that rate is climbing. So servicing that debt is getting more and more expensive for Japan. So this is definitely something to watch. We've got an upside target here, some 6% higher to 3.8%, and then another upside target 14% higher to 4.12. Now, this is just an interesting development that Japan is effectively, has got higher and higher debt servicing costs, and that's certainly one of the keys we're looking at. And last week we talked about how the world is certainly seeing different things happening in this regard. So the UK is in a situation where its bond yield, the 10-year gilt yield, is actually making 12-month lows. So that is good news for the UK in terms of their debt servicing costs getting lower. But this is a backdrop of a very mixed picture. If we look at Germany, for example, looking at the bond market here, we see that here this is looking like a little bit higher. So quite interesting that we've got upside targets potentially in Europe. Italy, another heavily indebted market, not looking as bad, but Germany, that is very, very interesting. The Aussie market, which is where we are, we're talking about Aussie bond yields. They're edging higher all the time, getting near 5%. And then, of course, the US market, the US 10-year yield, which is still here, have just actually activated this upside target. So this is really significant because we had the 30-year target already activated on the chart, but now we had that target in train, but just at the end of last week, the 10-year bond yield target has now activated. So that's really quite key, and certainly something that we have to now watch. So certainly bond markets in the US now doing interesting things. Now, the US market is closed. Today is Martin Luther King Day, so that's certainly going to be, markets are going to be quiet really without the US market opening. We did see in terms of the stock indices, the NASDAQ 100 was down very slightly on Friday, still hasn't managed to activate this upside target. So, it is subdued. And any of you who watch my market breadth session, it's up on the Updater website. Any of you watch my market breadth session for the London Stock Exchange will have seen my analysis that I was doing on global markets in equities and just the breadth across various markets. So that was also quite an interesting factor. The breadth, we're seeing the Mag 7 is actually underperforming the rest of the market. The futures are open, and we do have down about 1% today. Of course, all eyes on Trump and these new threats of tariffs. So we are just seeing US futures reacting, but without the broader markets opening, it's going to be a relatively quiet day. And if we look at some of the other indices, it's still only 6:30 in the morning in the UK, so we haven't really got hands up there. But if we look at Japan, which we were just talking about, that market's still pushing higher in equities. So really interesting that that whilst we're seeing the bond market looking worrying and the yields looking worrying, equities are still forging higher. And if we look at the Japanese yen, This has been quite an interesting one relative to the dollar. The dollar is buying more yen, but there's some resistance at around this 158 level, so that's quite key. And the dollar is down, the dollar index down about 0.25%, so it's still on a medium-term basis in this sideways range. Watch for new lows. We're just going to watch for how we trade out of that range. So that's going to be quite significant as well. Just looking at some of the other things, silver, of course, is always in the news at the moment. That's up 4% today, so and just nudging new highs again. So really quite key there that we're seeing that just that candle there just pushing to new highs. We're at $93. We've got an upside target here that's higher still, and on the weekly chart we've got an even bigger target. So that's still looking very bullish as a chart. And gold, remember we gave this target on gold at 4,200 to 4,716. We're only now 40 points away from that, $40 away from that, so we're nearly there, less than 1% to go to meet that target. You just can't ignore the targets. So that will be interesting indeed. Looking at just some of the commodities, we've got Brent crude down 0.5%. Again, all eyes on Iran, what's going to happen there and whether that's going to spike prices. But the reality is the trend is predominantly down. The weekly chart on crude oil is still very bearish indeed, with downside targets and below the cloud. And then if we look at the energy mix, which we'll be looking at shortly in the morning call out to clients, we had a huge week in European gas, prices rising there, just really rocketing. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens this week, and that will be going out in our morning call report. So a quieter day today with Martin Luther King Day in the US. So we're not really expecting any great action. Oh, one last one, Bitcoin down 3%. That's also quite significant. Failing to really contain this breakout, still below the cloud there. Again, I took the targets off. You can just press the T key and put them back on. These are all rules-based. Those downside targets met. We have got a new upside target, but we are below the cloud, and if we make new lows, we activate a big downside target. So that's certainly one to watch. Look at the shorter-term targets, and you can see here, price target given, collapse. That target's been met. That target was given and straight away met. If you're trading Bitcoin, you want to be looking at the 1-minute targets. That's it for today. Until tomorrow, happy charting. Bye for now.